Thank you so very much, Will, for that moving, beautiful, original music. Good morning again, mighty congregants and guests. It is my absolute delight and pleasure to introduce to you this morning's Sunday service speaker. Dr. Will Tuttle was selected by the FOOF Animal Ministry chapter here as our speaker, so he is our first speaker that we have been able to select and have come speak for us. Dr. Will Tuttle is an award-winning speaker, educator, author, and as you just heard, musician. His music, writings, and presentations focus on compassion, intuition, meditation, social justice, and creativity. Creator and visionary author of the international bestseller, The World Peace Diet, published in 19 languages, as well as over a dozen other books and CDs, Dr. Tuttle presents regularly, both online and at conferences and events throughout North America and worldwide, and has lectured and performed in over 50 countries. A featured expert in a number of vegan-oriented documentary films, he's the recipient of the prestigious Courage of Conscience Award, the Empty Cages Prize, and the Homo Ahimsa Award. His doctorate degree from UC Berkeley focused on educating intuition and altruism, and he has taught college courses in creativity, comparative religion, and philosophy, and is a former Zen monk and Dharma master in the Zen tradition. Dr. Tuttle has worked extensively exploring and promoting topics such as intuition development, healing music, creativity, animal liberation, and cultural evolution. He travels globally with his lovely spouse and my friend, dear friend, Madeline, a visionary artist, as you can see some pieces here and out front, from Switzerland. Madeline is also a flutist, a Waldorf teacher, an organic gardener extraordinaire, a vegan chef, and artisan. Please help me give a warm welcome to Dr. Will Tuttle.
Thank you, Stanley. And welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us here in this beautiful space of love, and it's an honor to be with you. So I'd like to go ahead and talk a little bit about the World Peace Diet and how we can create a world where freedom and justice and sustainability are actually possible. And underlying everything, as you know, we've already got a little bit of a preview here. We're talking the word that's been already used once, veganism. And I think that word can be sort of scary, so I just want to talk about it more as the idea of just doing the best we can to minimize abuse of other living beings, humans and others and future generations and ecosystems, and each one of us doing our best to adopt an attitude of inclusivity that includes not just humans but all living beings within the sphere of our kindness and our concern. And I'd like to just tell a little bit, because I think the key to everything really is community. You know, we eat the way we eat because of the communities we're raised in. And one of the most powerful ways to transform societies is through communities. We can come together and create communities of kindness and sanity and caring, and that ripples out into the larger society. So I think there's no greater gift in many ways than the gift of working together to create communities of sanity and kindness and caring. And when we do that, we're planting seeds that nurture not only ourselves and the community, but it goes out, it radiates into the world. And that takes not only working together, but really the foundation of it is the inner work, the spiritual work to reconnect with our own inner wisdom. You mentioned intuition. I think that, my PhD at Berkeley, I focused on the idea that each one of us has an inner guidance system that we can learn to connect with, so that we don't have to just believe whatever the media says or the authorities say. We can connect with an inner knowing and then come together to try to cultivate that in a positive way. So in my own life, I was born back in the 1950s, and I was born in Concord, Massachusetts, which for Unitarians, that's kind of like Mecca in a way, maybe in some ways, because I learned to swim in Walden Pond. I went to Thoreau School. I was born in Emerson Hospital. I went to the Alcott School. So I was like marinated in this whole thing, really, from the time I was born. And I didn't realize it, really, and what was going on until I went away to college, and I actually started reading for the first time Emerson and Thoreau, and it really completely changed my life. And Walt Whitman, too, right? These transcendentalists from Concord really lit a light inside of me, I think, that that never went out, in many ways. But food-wise, I'll mention that also. We ate the usual food everybody ate. I remember when I was about 7 years old, I was the oldest child in the family, and we ate lots of meat, dairy, and eggs, and the typical thing. I remember asking my mother, "So, Mom, the kind of food we're eating, is this what everybody eats?" And she said, "Yeah, everybody, yeah, pretty much. Yeah, it's pretty much what everybody eats, yep." And then she left, and then she came back a few minutes later. I still remember this, and she said, "That wasn't totally true what I said, because there are some people who eat differently. They're called vegetarians." And I had never heard that word in my life, of course. And so I said, "So what's a vegetarian?" I was at the age when I liked learning new words, especially if they were kind of long. Vegetarian, like, what's that? That's a good one. And she thought for a minute, and she goes, "You don't have to worry about it. You're never going to meet one." And then she said, "I don't know where they get their protein." So I had in my mind this image of these really pathetic, stupid people who didn't know enough to eat enough protein. They were probably dragging themselves through the dirt, begging for protein. And I was so glad I was not a vegetarian. That sounded like the worst thing. And my mother was right. I never heard the word again. That was the end of it. But I do remember when I got a little bit older, every year for a few years when I was in my early teens, 13, 14, 15, my younger brother Ed and I would go up to Vermont for a month to a summer camp called Camp Challenge. And we did lots of mountaineering and kayaking, canoeing and things, but it was affiliated with a little farm. And so I learned how to catch my own chicken and hold her down, have my axe, and put her through the scalding tank. We would eat our chickens. And I didn't like doing it, but I knew I was doing the right thing, because at that point I'd gone through 13 years of the most intense indoctrination a human being can possibly go through, and I knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that God gave us certain animals to eat. They don't have a soul like we do. They taste good, and if you don't eat them, you will definitely die within 24 hours of a protein deficiency. So that's what you got to do. So I was like 13 years old. Okay, I'm not a boy, I'm a man. I can now get the food. It's that kind of a coming-of-age ritual. And I remember also every year we would gather around one of the dairy cows, and we would do the same thing. We'd put a gun, and and the guy would say, "Well, we can't use her for milk anymore. We have to use her for meat. She's gotten too old." And it was really, it was a messy thing. But I remember we would ask the guy, we'd say, "Well, she's too old now. Like, how old is she?" "Oh, she's 5 years old. It's too old." And cows would live 25 years normally, but on any I've done the research. I now understand that on a dairy operation, organic or not, large or small, basically the cows are kept pregnant and lactating. They're just to be exploited. They're female. It's about exploiting the feminine. That's what animal agriculture actually is. And so they've been kept pregnant and lactating simultaneously through 4 pregnancies, and that no female mammal can endure that, and so they're worn out. And so one of the offspring will be a slave on the dairy to replace. So I saw all that, but I thought, okay, good, that's what you got to do. And I didn't make the connection. I went away to Colby College in Maine, and I remember it was during the Vietnam War. People were protesting, and I heard there were some vegetarians on campus, but I never met one. They're around somewhere, lurking on the edges. But I did start to really get interested in religion, and also like social justice issues. The war, brought a lot out, and so I started reading Emerson and Thoreau and the Transcendentalist movement, and how Thoreau spent the night in jail and wouldn't pay war taxes, and how they created this community I learned about that was actually vegetarian, was called Fruitlands. All these things And I decided, well, also I began to read Eastern religion somewhat, yoga and meditation. I started meditating for the first time. And as I got into this, I began to feel that it would be a mistake not to focus my life on spirituality. My father owned the local newspaper. It was one, and then it expanded. He owned the Concord Free Press and a bunch of, he had like 13 newspapers by the time I was in college. And that was mine. I was me to take it over. I was born and raised to take that whole thing over. But I was concerned that if I did that, I would end up in my 60s or 70s and retire, and I wouldn't have had a chance to really go on a spiritual quest. So I remember talking to my father and mother about it, and my brother, because we started to realize through these books that it's possible to attain what they call it was cosmic consciousness. There was a book actually that came out about in the 1890s called Cosmic Consciousness. And the basic idea was that most people live our lives basically self-consciousness, like we care about ourselves or our group. A few rare people had attained what they call cosmic consciousness, this higher level of consciousness. People like Jesus and the Buddha and these great sages, both men and women, over the ages. And the whole idea is that it's the destiny of humanity to get to a higher consciousness, this higher intellectual and moral elevation where we really care about everyone, not just ourselves. And so I remember talking to my younger brother, Ed, and he said, yes, we should do what we can to attain cosmic consciousness. That's what Thoreau and Emerson, that's what they wanted to do, you know. So we talked to our parents, and I remember my father actually, I think he was probably disappointed on one level, but he said, every man must march to the beat of the drum that he hears. He actually quoted Thoreau. And so we left. We left our home right after I graduated from Colby College. We walked down the driveway with some little backpacks and some fresh baked cookies from my mother, and we thought we're going to walk to California with no money. We're just going to meditate like the sadhus of India. We'll attain enlightenment on the way somehow. We'll find. We thought, you know, there's only one way to attain cosmic consciousness, and that's to go to California, right? That was, because we were really like, how do we do this? You know, what do we do? We go to California, of course. So we headed west, and we walked for maybe, I guess it was about a month. It was October, right about now. And we got as far as Buffalo. And in Buffalo, it was freezing. And we thought, all right, I got a bachelor's degree from a very good college. I can figure this out. We better head south. So we actually walked south for quite a few, all the way down through upstate New York, Pennsylvania, across Pennsylvania, West Virginia. We got into the Bible Belt. I didn't know what that meant, but I found out that they try to save you every night. You know, it was really a very interesting experience. All the way across West Virginia into Kentucky, across Kentucky into Tennessee. And in Tennessee, we heard about and we went to and lived for a while at the farm. And the farm in Tennessee, if you don't know, in 1975 was the largest hippie commune in the world. They had 900 people living there, and they were all vegetarians. And we were not vegetarian. We would like eat whatever the heck we could get because we were, we didn't have any money, whatever. But we talked to the people there, and we said, so why are you vegetarian? And we found out that they said they were vegetarian, but they were actually what we would call today vegan, in the sense that they didn't eat meat or dairy or eggs or honey, and they were really living that way. And they said it's for two reasons. One reason is most of the food we're growing, instead of feeding it to people who are hungry, we're feeding it to cows and pigs and chickens, and they waste most of it as sewage and all this other stuff. So if we would just eat lower on the food chain, we could feed everyone, and we could have peace, because so much of the violence and war in the world is because of injustice and the lack of some people taking too much and other people not having enough. So we're eating lower on the food chain, so there's enough for everyone to eat. And I thought, that's great. All right, and what's the other reason? And the fellow said, well, the other reason is, do you know what these animals go through that people are eating, these cows and pigs and chickens, and you know how they're treated? And I said, don't tell me. I don't want to hear about it. He said, well, I'm going to tell you a little bit. So he told me a little bit about the routine confinement and mutilation and just the horrific violence and torture that we inflict on these animals before we kill them. It's just part of the system. And so I thought, oh, wow. But the thing that was really great was that the whole community, there was, like I say, 900 people. They were about 200 children, and they were all thriving. They were doing great. Nobody was dying of a protein deficiency. Nobody was dragging themselves through the dirt. They were vibrant, alive, happy people, right? Growing a lot of food. And so since that day, I talked to that guy, I have never eaten meat since 1975. And it was so neat because I met Madeline many years later, and it turns out the same month and year, over in Switzerland, this young Swiss artist made the same decision. We met later. And eventually we left there, my brother and I, we ended up in a, believe it or not, in a Zen center in Alabama, Huntsville, that was actually run by the local Unitarians. They actually put it together. So we lived there for a while, and then I eventually got out to San Francisco, and I lived in Tibetan Buddhist meditation centers and Zen centers, and eventually shaved my head and became a Zen Buddhist monk in Korea. And then I found myself for the second time in what we would call a vegan community. There was no meat, no dairy, no eggs, also no wool, no silk, no leather, not even killing insects, right? The whole idea was to try to live a life of ahimsa. Ahimsa is a Sanskrit word. It's really, I think, at the core of all the world religions. It means non-harmfulness. Just to try to not harm other beings, if possible. Just do the best you can. And I think the thing that was so powerful for me with that was that this community had been living what we would call a vegan life for 750 years, right? So I realized this is not this new hippie idea from California. This is an ancient wisdom tradition that actually goes back centuries, millennia, really, if you go back. This is not some new thing. People have understood that if we're really serious about spiritual evolution or consciousness or creating a world of kindness and compassion and so forth, we should treat others as we would like to be treated. The golden rule is really the golden rule. I mean, that's pure gold. If we treat others as we would like to be treated. And all of us, we have companion animals. We understand what it's like to love our dog or our cat or our companion animal. And we would not like it if someone came by and said, wow, she looks so good. I mean, how about like $6 a pound maybe? No. I love my little, you can't eat her, And so we care about those animals because we know them. We see them as individuals. And we know that they have interests that are as important to them as my interests are to me, right? And it's the same thing with cows and pigs and chickens and these other animals, fishes and so forth. They have interests that are as important to them as my interests are to me. The problem is we're raised in a society, and it's not our fault, we're just wounded, essentially, I think spiritually and ethically, where we're just forced, in many ways compelled to participate in rituals where we systematically deny that kind of caring and kindness and respect for other living beings. And we do it as just, this is just how it is. We don't really question it. We learn to just more or less stay shallow and not think about it. And so for me, it's been such a tremendous gift to realize that I don't need to harm animals to be healthy. And I think this is the main point I want to make this morning, is the good news that all of us as human beings have been given a body, right? Here we are. We've got this body, this vehicle, and it does not require any animals to be imprisoned or abused to be healthy. Here I am now, it's been 44 years. I became a vegan in 1980, so I was a vegetarian for about 5 years, and then I figured out dairy and eggs in 1980 when I was in California. And so I haven't eaten any animal foods of any kind in 40 years. Madeline's the same, pretty much. And, here I am. And the basic thing is I'm not the only one. There's millions of people who live this way, who don't suffer. And what I've learned is that all of the nutrients that find their way into the flesh of animals or dairy products or eggs originally came from plants. Like all the amino acids that make all the proteins, all the essential fatty acids that make up all the fats, all the carbohydrates and fiber, all the minerals, vitamins, all of the nutrients basically come from plants. So we don't have to go through the middle animal. We can get them directly from plants. So it's a big learning curve, and even more, it's a big unlearning curve, right? Learn a lot of what we think we know about nutrition and also about ourselves, like who we are and how we want to live and how we get along in the world, because food is the most powerful way that we connect with each other. It's how we have fellowship. We share bread together, or we have a turkey together, these kinds of things. And so as soon as we say, well, I don't eat the tribe's food, it's like, uh-oh. Then you just go out and die by yourself then if you're not part of the tribe. So it's very scary in many ways to think about this, to think I'm not going to eat the tribe's food. But the good news is that as we just think about it, again, there's no point in blaming or shaming or criticizing anyone, because we're all doing the best we can, and we've been born into a society where this has been the norm for 10,000 years. In the World-East Diet, I go into the whole history of this and just show, it's very interesting to see how 10,000 years ago we started for the very first time to own animals as property for food. That's called herding. It was wild sheep and wild goats in what is today the northeastern part of Iraq. And that was the greatest revolution ever in the history of humanity, because that changed everything. It changed our relationship with animals. They, instead of being mysterious and powerful cohabitants of the earth with us, they became property. We own them. And we began to breed them. We began to sexually manipulate and abuse them. And then the other animals who are not our property, gradually their status also dropped because they now became pests. They could interfere with our property. And that led eventually, thousands of years, to the arising for the first time on planet Earth of a wealthy elite class, a powerful class, just a few, who were wealthy and powerful for one reason. They owned capital. Capita is the old Latin word for head. They had head of sheep and goats and cows. So these were the ancient kings. I used to teach college courses in the ancient writings, the Epic of Gilgamesh, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the ancient Old Testament writings. These ancient, the oldest writings, you just read them. There's these kings, they're dominating the entire society, pretty much like now. We have a few rich that dominate everybody else. And they figured out the best way for them to increase their wealth was to go to war. Does that sound familiar? And the oldest word for war on planet Earth is gavia. It means the desire for more cows. I remember reading, I used to teach Plato's Republic. Socrates says very clearly, he says, well, if we want to eat meat, we'll have to go to war. They knew that 2,500 years ago. They understood that. We seem to have forgotten that. So they would go to war to get more capital. And see another king who had a lot of livestock, and take that, and there would be a fight, and then whoever lost the war, all of that wealth, which was the livestock, would become the property, and they would need land and water to support them. But it also led to slavery. It was really the first slavery on planet Earth, was whoever lost the war also became the property of the victors, and they would buy and sell animals and people. Because what I've realized is whatever we do to animals, sooner or later we do it to each other. So the whole underlying idea is that if we really are serious about creating a world of justice and freedom and health and sustainability for ourselves, we should definitely not be stealing health and freedom and justice and purposes of other living beings. Because the other main teaching in all the world religions, besides the Golden Rule, is this one. Whatever you sow, so shall you reap. Those are the two pillars of all spiritual teachings, of all ancient wisdom. And that's the problem. We think that somehow, magically, we can sow seeds of violence and abuse and harm and misery by the millions every day, unnecessarily, because we don't need to actually eat them, and somehow be worthy of freedom and justice for ourselves while we steal it from others, other living beings. And the thing is, it's time for us, I think, to just begin to, again, without blaming anyone, just understand this has got 10,000 years of momentum, of inertia. And all of our institutions are organized around that. Our medical industry, our political industry, all the corporations, education, religion, everything. So to begin to just question official narratives that promote and legitimize violence to other beings, and then do whatever steps we can in our own life to live in that way. And I have to say, it's not a bad life. I mean, I've got a pretty wife, No, it's not a bad life. Because what I've discovered also from a health point of view, we have not actually been to a drugstore to buy any pill or anything since the 1970s. And it's been just the freedom, to never get sick. I mean, just be healthy all the time. And we've traveled all over the world, and we've gone all over India, China, Asia, Africa, the Middle East. You gotta be careful, you're probably going to get sick. There are all kinds of problems over there. No, I'm not going to get sick. Because when you have a healthy immune system and you're living your purpose, and we know that what we are is not just this body. What we are is the spirit that makes this possible. We have to really understand that. We are eternal. consciousness. We have a body, but we're not just only the body. And so when we understand this and we see the best in others and do the best we can to be kind and loving to others, we're not penalized for that. We will have more joy and more health. So our society right now is in the grips of a lot of fear and division and domination and exploitation of the weak by the strong, and it's a reflection of animal agriculture, the mentality that is required of us to sit down at the table and eat the flesh and secretions of horribly abused animals. It requires us to just not think about it, stay shallow, not make the connections. So what we're talking about is just simply start making connections. You know, my PhD at Berkeley focused on intelligence. And the definition of intelligence is the capacity to make relevant connections. But if I'm sitting at the table and think I'm eating bacon, I'm not going to make the connection. I don't want to think about what that pig went through to have this on the plate. So again, to realize that we're not in any way criticizing anyone, but just to encourage all of us to do the best we can to make the connections, to look deeply, look beyond the surface. And when we see a burger, like, well, where did that come from? When we see a piece of cheese, like, well, where did that come from? Anything, whatever it is, just to try to look more deeply and realize that when we vote, we have really a ballots right here. You know, whatever we vote for is going to happen. These ballots always get counted. So this is something important to understand, that each one of us, by our life choices, we build the world that we'd like to have. And so we can, each one of us, bring our own lives into harmony, into alignment with our values. And when we do that, we become an example. And we don't have to try to change anyone. I don't ever try to change anyone. If someone came up to me and was trying to change me, I'd say, like, leave me alone. So, but if we can change ourselves so that we're living a life of kindness and compassion, not just theoretically, but actually, then we create communities of kindness and concern automatically. And just do the best we can. In other words, just do the best we can to bring our lives into that, into alignment with that, and then ask questions like, well, what about, where do I get my protein? Or what about plants have feelings too? All that. In the book, The World Peace Diet, I answer all those questions, and it's a 13-and-a-half-hour audiobook, and I would love to stand here right now and talk to you for 13-and-a-half hours. But as a vegan, I don't like to cause unnecessary suffering to sentient beings. So I'm going to stop here. I really appreciate your kind attention. And just thank you, all of you, really, for staying here in the room. Nobody ran out and slammed the door in the middle of what I was saying. So that's really great. I mean, that's happened before, believe me. I didn't come to church on Sunday morning to hear somebody talk about my food, for God's sake, So, no, it's really an honor to be with you, because I can feel, Matt and I both talked about it, there's so much love in this community, so much kindness and caring and respect. And that's really all we're talking about, kindness and caring and respect, and including all beings within the sphere of our concern, and realizing that really there's one life living through all of us. That beautiful hymn, the spirit of life, it's living through all of us. We are all waves on one ocean. And when we look with the eyes of benevolence and goodwill and do the best we can to help others, we're serving that spirit of life. And that's the basic teaching, the interconnectedness of all life and the interconnectedness of the welfare of all beings. And we can live our lives as a prayer. I think that's really what Jesus and all the great teachers were talking about, is that our life is sacred. And every action is a prayer when it's done in mindfulness and with awareness of the ripples that radiate from our lives, because ripples radiate from our lives. When I take out my wallet and pay for something, all kinds of ripples. Do I want to have ripples that cause terror and fear and pain and despair, or ripples that bring joy and freedom? So we grow a lot of our own food, and we just do our best. And again, not to compete or anything, just each one of us do our best to embody really the teachings. I think that's really what we're talking about here. So I'd like to close with just a short piece of music with some slides that we'll show here. And this is of animals celebrating their lives. And I'll say just a word about the music. When Madeline first came over from Switzerland, I was living in a Volkswagen bus. It was really a great story. I was living in a 1971 Volkswagen bus, traveling around giving concerts and talks and things. And I had met her in Switzerland. I played the piano over there, and she fell in love with the music. And she came over, and I said, I said, well, she said, I'm going to come over and visit. I said, I have nowhere to put you. You know, I'm living in a Volkswagen bus. Oh, don't worry. I've lived in grass shacks in Kenya and long houses in Borneo, and I travel all over a van. Australia in a van. I won't be any problem. So then she came over and met me in San Francisco, and she moved into the little Volkswagen bus. I gave her one of my 2 drawers I had for clothes. And we ended up falling in love, getting married. And we've been now for 31 years, I think, we are together. Yeah. I'm so grateful, really. Thank you. And I always think, you know, her painting, she has so many paintings of animals, the beauty of animals. That's really the message, is of the beauty that we share. So we got a little house way out on a dirt road in Healdsburg, California. And the house was just filled with mice when we got there. And so I would kind of catch them and then take them down across this little stream below the house and hope that they didn't come running back in again. And one day I had a little mouse, and I put her in a little jar, and she was sitting on the piano, and I kind of looked at her, and I started playing. And she just pulled this little melody out of me, and I wrote it down. So I'd like to share it with you now. Madeline and I call this the mouse piece. But I love what Walt Whitman said. Walt Whitman said in one of his poems, and even a mouse is enough to stagger sextillions of infidels. Isn't that great? So, because that's a beautiful thing. When we look deeply into nature, we see so much beauty. And here in Florence, you know, you have so much beauty. And that sense of beauty, I think it encourages us to protect the beauty. So this is the mouse piece, and it'll be with some slides here. Thank you very much.